We want to say things accurately, but we don't always know how to say things accurately. We don't want to say things that completely throw off our kids' understandings of the universe, but it is still important to find ways to be able to continue that conversation.
We are delighted to introduce a dynamic mother-daughter duo who have dedicated their lives to religious education and the teachings of the Urantia Book. Alice Wood and Vicki Arkens bring a wealth of experience and passion to their presentation on religious education for the whole family. Alice, another second-generation student of the Urantia Book, has seamlessly integrated its teachings into her life.
She's a creator of Urantia Life Lessons, a website offering various resources for children and adults. As a communications chair of the Greater Lake Michigan Urantia Association, GLUMA, and the program coordinator for Urantia University's teacher education program, Alice continually fosters spiritual growth and education. She is also the proud mother of 2 boys who keep her pretty grounded and active.
Vicki, a longtime reader of the Urantia Book and the mother, has a deep interest in Part 4. She founded the Urantia Year blog spot, featuring an annual cycle of reading and a children's curriculum called One-Page Stories of Jesus. With a teaching degree in secondary education and extensive experience teaching Sunday school, Vicki has a profound understanding of religious education. She and her husband, Bob, have been married for 50 years, raising 3 children and enjoying the company of their 3 grandchildren.
Together, Alice and Vicki will explore the influence of the religious guardians and the angels of progress in devising family-oriented religious education.
Okay, thanks very much for that introduction, and thank you in the audience for attending this. Religious Education for the Whole Family is the title. I'm going to go first, and then Alice will take over after that. But before I start my slides, I'd like to share a childhood memory with you. I remember as a child, 3 or 4 years of age, I was a preschooler at the time. I remember being able to tell the Christmas story by heart. And the only reason I remember that is because I have a couple of fleeting memories. One being where I was set upon a stool and asked to tell the Christmas story. And this was just with 4 adults in the room. I think it was a dinner party or something like that, and my parents were there. And then the other fleeting memory is being brought to the bedside of an elderly woman who was living with my grandmother. And she was very ill. She was laying in bed. And they asked me to come in and tell her the Christmas story. And I'm pretty sure that I learned the Christmas story from this book right here. This is the little golden book. It's still available right now. And but mine probably had a different cover. I was born in 1953. It came out in 52. And I'm pretty sure my parents probably read it to me, and I requested it. And I did have a tendency to like to look at pictures in books, and I probably looked at the pictures quite a bit. We had a few other books, picture books that I like to look at. Here was Bible Story ABC book. This is the actual one that I had. And this has some great pictures in it too that I enjoyed very much as a child. And then there was one other book. I don't have it. It's a pop-up book of Bible stories. And I just remember being very careful when I turned one of the pages, because I knew that this was the Jonah and the whale story. And pretty soon, if I turned the page, the whale's mouth would come open like that. And that kind of scared me a little bit. Anyway, the reason why I'm telling you all this is because I still love looking at Bible story pictures, and you'll see a few of those in my slides. All right, Religious Education for the Whole Family, Part 1. These are the 4 things that I'm going to be talking about. The religious guardians. They're some of the they're a group of seraphim, the master seraphim. I'm going to be talking a bit about the Nazareth Synagogue School that Jesus went to. I'll talk about my project, One-Page Stories of Jesus, a children's curriculum. And then I've recently completed what I call 4-adult study that coordinates with One-Page Stories of Jesus. And as you can see, there's a little picture here. This is one of those pictures that I like, and this is an old picture. The artist was born in 1886. And when I look at this little family, and of course, this is a picture of the flight to Egypt, or the escape to Egypt. That's Mary, Joseph, and little baby Jesus. When I look at this little family, I just really wonder how they felt. They must have been feeling quite alone as they were heading out, leaving behind everything that was familiar, a lot of uncertainty. And then I decided to use this picture because I thought Urantia Book readers might have some similar feelings as they search out ways to pass on their enthusiasm about the Urantia Book and to provide religious education for their children. Next, we'll look at the religious guardians, and that's in paper 114, the Master Seraphim of Planetary Supervision. There's 12 groups of these angels. The second group is called the Progress Angels, and the third group is called the Religious Guardians. Now, I chose this picture here because the two angels kind of they just represent to me the Progress Angels and the Religious Guardians. And the name of this picture is Angels in Clouds over Jerusalem. And you can see the 3 crosses in the right hand. Well, perhaps you can see that anyway. And so we know from the Urantia Book that the Master Seraphim came to this world after the bestowal of the Spirit of Truth. Now we're going to just take a brief look at the Progress Angels. Alice will also be talking about them, but I wanted to at least just skim over them before I start talking about the Religious Guardians. Now, these are in bullet points here, but actually in the Urantia Book, these sentences are all in one paragraph. These seraphim are entrusted with the task of initiating the evolutionary progress of the successive social ages. They foster the development of the inherent progressive trend of evolutionary creatures. They labor incessantly to make things what they ought to be. And that's what really stands out to me, this last sentence. They labor incessantly to make things what they ought to be. And now I'm going to go to the Religious Guardians because they're the ones that I'm mainly focusing on. These are the angels of the churches, the earnest contenders for that which is and has been. Now, the angels of the churches, in case you don't know, that's from the book of Revelation at the end of the Bible. The Apostle John had a vision of Jesus surrounded by 7 lampstands, and in his hand were 7 stars. The 7 lampstands are considered to be the 7 churches, and the 7 stars are the angels, and they're probably the angels of those churches. Now, the other thing about this first sentence, it says they are the earnest contenders for that which is and has been. And I'll probably repeat that a few times as I go through. Second sentence, they endeavor to maintain the ideals of that which has survived for the sake of the safe transit of moral values from one epoch to another. Here we have the word values and then one epoch to another. So we're talking about long periods of time. Third sentence, they are the checkmates of the angels of progress, all the while seeking to translate from one generation to another the imperishable values of the old and passing forms into the new and therefore less stabilized patterns of thought and conduct. So here we're not talking about epochs, we're talking about from one generation to another. Values are in there again, but now they've introduced the word forms, the old and passing forms. And then the word patterns. And the last sentence here that I have on the screen is, these angels do contend for spiritual forms, but they are not the source of ultra-sectarianism and meaningless, controversial divisions of professed religionists. Now they've added the word spiritual forms. I've puzzled a lot about the word form. And what I've come to is that maybe they're talking about form being a container, a framework, a scaffolding, a format, a method. Maybe people in the panel can help me figure this out. The next screen is going to be the Nazareth Synagogue School, and I think that fits in with the goals of the religious guardians, for after all, they are the earnest contenders for that which is and has been. This is from paper 123, section 5, School Days in Nazareth. We have the synagogue school. You can see it depicted on the right. The Hazan, which is the teacher. And during class in the synagogue school, the students learned the Hebrew language. And they spoke Aramaic at home, so they had to actually learn the Hebrew language at school. Jesus already knew the Greek language, which is pretty amazing to me, that he knew that even when he entered school at age 7. They did a lot of memorization of scripture besides learning the language. And these were 7 to 12-year-olds. Now, as I look at this picture, I think, well, that is a very pretty picture. I'm sure the Nazareth Synagogue was a little bit more rustic than that, but it gives it's a good representation, because the students did indeed sit in a semicircle around the Hazan. Now, the next slide is going to be about the apostles, and it talks about how they too were graduates of the synagogue schools. It says here, do not make the mistake of regarding the apostles as being altogether ignorant and unlearned. All of them, except the Alphaeus twins, were graduates of the synagogue schools, having been thoroughly trained in the Hebrew scriptures and in much of the current knowledge of that day. 7 were graduates of the Capernaum synagogue schools, and there were no better Jewish schools in all of Galilee. And my purpose in reading this is that when Jesus had his 12 apostles, he knew they were well grounded in that which is and has been. And I think we should maybe consider that for our own children and for ourselves, that we should know that which is and has been. The next slide is going to be about my one-page stories of Jesus, and I'm going to be considering how it fits in with the goals of the religious guardians. One-page stories of Jesus is a children's curriculum. It's a 5-year curriculum, 31 lessons per school year. I focused on the traditional stories. The traditional stories of Jesus, that is, they are the ones that appear in the Urantia Book and the Bible. Each handout that you see in the right there has a picture, a story summary, and discussion questions below. Anyone can sign up for this. They can be put onto an email list and get a PDF email from me every week during the school year with a new lesson. I've actually designed these to be used with a small group of 8 to 12-year-olds. And when I've done it with kids, it takes about a half hour. Now, I must say, looking at, turning your attention to the picture there, the name of the lesson is On the Shore, Part 2, and that's one of Jesus's appearances. But it's Part 2 where Jesus is talking to Peter and he says, "Feed my sheep." I don't own these pictures, and I certainly did not draw them. You would not want to see any of my drawings. They're derived from a publication that allows them to be reproduced and used for ministry purposes, not for resale. So definitely this is free of charge. Sometimes I can just, sometimes I can copy a picture, but sometimes I have to put different pictures, different aspects of pictures together to get what I want. So fortunately, I seem to be able to do that. These began as a simple way to do Sunday school. And I must say that there are great curriculums out there in the Christian community, but sometimes I've found them to be so complex. I wanted something a little bit more simple. I switched my focus to the Urantia community, but I stayed with the traditional stories. And as it turns out, I think these fit in well with the goals of the religious guardians. Stories are containers of ideals and values. And these are the stories that have long been known in the world. And the format of a small group of the teacher is similar to the synagogue school. Next, I'm going to zoom in on the written portion that you see below the picture and talk about that just a little bit. There's a reading reference, in this case from paper 192, and I usually give a brief and full reference. I also make these handouts available with a Bible reference instead, because sometimes parents or grandparents need that. The story summary is written to be acceptable with either reference. The discussion questions are open-ended questions rather than single answer questions. Usually there's just 2 questions in this area. The content, I have to say that the content of the written portion is entirely appropriate for older students. A lot of times people think of this curriculum as being for young students because of the coloring picture, basically. But the content is really for older students. Next, I'm going to show you something. Next, I'm going to show you the adult study that I recently completed. All right, now this is the adult story. The adult study is has the written portion, the story summary, and the discussion questions, but it also has an additional reading. It has 2 Urantia Book quotes on a certain spiritual theme that's found in the story. There's the Bible citation, which is that if people want to read that, along with the Urantia Book citation. And then there's 2 interfaith quotes. And all of this for each lesson can be found on urantiayear.blogspot.com. Now, the picture in this is also, it's from actually part 1 of On the Shore. This is when Jesus is having breakfast with them on the shore. And this is a female artist, Evelyn Hardy, born in 1866. Next, I'm going to show you the top half of the adult study that's on this website I told you about. There's a narrowly cropped image always, no coloring picture. And then to the left of the coloring picture is a standard explanation that's in all the lessons. Then there's a link to the Urantia book. I use the Urantia Foundation's online text for that. Then there's the written portion, the story summary, and the discussion questions. And then there's a link to a post I made about if it's a teacher wanting to use this with children, the handouts with children, they can get some advice there. Now, the bottom portion of the adult study looks like this. There's the additional reading. And in this case, I chose something from paper 139, a few paragraphs. Then there's two quotes from the Urantia book on a spiritual theme found in the story. Bible citation is next, and then a link to a post I made about a book called Treasure House of the Living Religions, which is where I get the interfaith quotes. And now I'd like to say a little something about the Treasure House book. This book was very important to me while I was working on these lessons. Treasure House of the Living Religions, written by Robert Ernest Hume, copyright in 1932. 1932. He has 50 chapters of interfaith quotes. And these quotes are from 11 religions. They're the same 11 religions that are listed in paper 92. And I was alerted to the existence of this book by the fact that it's been noted to be a source for paper 131, which is when Gannett and Jesus were compiling their listings of quotes from various religions when they were in Alexandria. Now, as I said, this book was very important to me in identifying a spiritual theme in the story. Amazingly enough, sometimes in a certain story, it was hard for me to come up to really pull out well the spiritual theme. And sometimes I would just sit and look at these chapters in this book and finally settle on something. And next, just something fun here that I never knew existed before I started working on one-page stories of Jesus. This is something that was popular in the early part of the 20th century, Bible story cards. They were put out by a company called Providence Lithograph. And this company has a lot of images that are very beautiful. It's about the size of a trading card. You can see it in my hand there. And then in the front, there's the picture. There's a picture and then a memory verse. And then on the back is a story. And it says 1946 is when this was produced. I'm coming to the end here. This is my wrap up. Just wrapping up, looking at some of these images again that I like to look at. There's Mary and Joseph on their way to Egypt. And then there's the angels that to me represent the religious guardians and the progress angels, and then a depiction of the synagogue school. And then I'll leave you with a parting thought. And this is from paper 92. Man is an evolutionary creature and in the main must get his religion by evolutionary techniques.
Thanks, Mom.
Yep.
That was a great quote right there at the end. It says a lot in a very simple way.
Yeah, it does.
I'm going to go back to one quote that you kind of started with toward the beginning, the one about the angels of progress, because that is what the topic that I'm going to open with. Regarding the angels of progress, the Urantia Book says, these seraphim are entrusted with the task of initiating the evolutionary progress of the successive social ages. They foster the development of the inherent progressive trend of evolutionary creatures. They labor incessantly to make things what they ought to be. So these are the angels who are trying to move things forward on a planet. And we've got these two great role models. We've got the angels of the churches and the angels of progress. And we're reminded to not throw away that which is good, but also to move things forward so that things don't become stagnant. I don't know how much any of these angels are interested in anything that I am doing, but I do draw inspiration from them when I work on a project. I think about what has been done or is being done that has worked well, and I think about what needs to be done in order to bring about progress. So I will start by introducing you to two related projects that I've been working on. Many of you are probably familiar with my Urantia Life Lessons videos for grown-ups. They are 5-minute videos on YouTube intended to provide simple Urantia teachings that get related back to everyday life. I have expanded the scope of Urantia Life Lessons now to include resources for kids. And these resources are called CherubiMail for the younger kids and SeraphiMail for big kids and teens. They are activity pages that arrive in the post office mail, just like a magazine subscription would. And they come in an envelope with the kids' names on it. And this ensures that the pages end up in the hands of our youth. So here's an example of a CherubiMail page. And I think you'll recognize this. It's actually, I use the same pages that my mom developed for her one-page stories of Jesus. But then the method of delivery is different. Instead of getting emailed, it gets sent through the post office mail directly to the kids. And then here is an example of a SeraphiMail page for big kids and teens. It starts with a quote. This is probably my longest quote. I generally keep them to about half this length. It provides some commentary, and my favorite part is this part over here called "Why is this important?" And that is where I try to relate the lesson back to everyday life, because it's really important for me to ensure that young people who get these pages can see how these lessons are relevant to their daily lives. So I found inspiration for CherubiMail and SeraphiMail from my church. And the church that I'm a member of has a weekly handout called Taking Faith Home. And it's a summary of what kids learned about during Sunday school. And it's meant to help promote conversations between parents and kids during the week, rather than just talking about things on Sunday. And it worked. It cluttered up the table for a few days, but at some point we would pick it up and talk about it. And that is what I want to recreate when I started CherubiMail and SeraphiMail. These pages are intended to be present in Urantia homes so that at some point, someone will come along, pick up the page, and start talking about it. Conversations with kids are great, by the way. If you catch them in the right mood, they will just start asking question after question, and you never really know when the mood is going to strike. I like these questions so much that I started recording them. And so with my kids' permission and with my husband's permission, I am going to share with you guys one of the recordings of a conversation that took place in my home. It was several years ago. My kids were probably 5 and 7 at the time, and they're older than that now. But why don't we go ahead and listen to one of these recordings.
Dad,
Summer.
what does the UN book say about okay, so space and time collide?
Science talks about space and time being the function of the same realm. That essentially disruptions in space create disruptions in this time. So the ability to measure space and the ability to measure time are the same.
Yeah.
And if it gets harder to measure one, then it's easier to measure the other. The Urantia Book does not say that. The Urantia Book says that space and time come from two different sources, even though we experience them together.
And where does space come from and where does time come from?
God.
So they both come from God?
Uh-huh.
Now how does that make any sense? They come from two different sources, but they're coming from the same source, God!
Right. So,
Is it like coming from the right hand or coming from the left hand?
sure.
Leo eat in a tidy fashion.
But don't eat tide.
No matter how pretty they make it look.
They're so delicious looking.
Wait, Dad.
Yeah.
What does the UN book say about different dimensions?
Well, that's an excellent question.
Because I believe in different dimensions.
So, I heard some scientist person say that it really makes no sense that existence would be limited to 4 dimensions. He thinks that it makes more sense that the limit's something like 10 or 12 or something, but that we only experience 4 of them. Sort of like how there's this entire light spectrum, and we only see the middle part of it, but there's all this light that's happening below what we can see and above what we can see. So there's all these dimensions, we're only experiencing the middle 4.
Same with sound.
Right, same with sound. So the Urantia book doesn't use the word dimensions.
Leo, don't play the piano right now.
However,
You want me to say something?
Yes, don't play the piano right now.
now's the time for eating, Leo. However, it does talk about angels existing in a different material world, or having a different material existence than we have, a different substance that makes them up. It talks about how when we die, we go to and experience this different substance that they call merantial substance,
Different type of matter, like dark matter.
a different type of matter.
There will be light matter.
And then furthermore,
So there's an example of a Urantia conversation that took with kids in their home. And CherubiMail and SeraphiMail are intended to foster those kinds of conversations. I've heard from some people that even if they don't end up talking about what's on the page themselves, just having them around seems to get people thinking about Urantia related topics, and it brings up those questions. By the way, Chris and I are not physicists. I make no claims to the accuracy of what was said in this video. Half the time we do, as what's the phrase I use with my kids, talking out of our butts. We just try to say with as much accuracy as we can whatever we end up saying, and please don't make all of your comments trying to correct what was said. So another purpose that these pages serve is that they remind kids that they are a part of a religious community, even if that community is spread out. And I think that's so important because kids want to have a sense of belonging. They want to have friends who are their peers, who make them feel good about being a part of this Urantia community. So while the pages are nice for giving them little reminders about being a part of this community, nothing beats in-person interaction. If I look to the past, I can see how this in-person interaction was done successfully within the Urantia community. Many kids, including myself, have memories of the Jerusalem Marketplace, which served as the children's program at many Urantia conferences. This is a great model for children's programs at Urantia conferences, but I'm interested in expanding services for families by creating a program that is inclusive to families where only one parent reads the Urantia book. Which brings me to my next project, Family Week. This is something that is still in development. There haven't actually been any family weeks yet, but I think it has great potential for fostering more engagement within Urantia families. Family Week is essentially a shared vacation. Parents and kids get together at a place with cabins or camping. There's a beach, a woods, hiking and biking trails, and hopefully an ice cream shop. And families can do whatever they would normally do on vacation. They might join other families on a bike ride, or they might go with just their own family to do some sightseeing. How they spend their time is up to them. But I do envision there being some Urantia flair mixed in. In the mornings, there would be a children and teen program with songs, crafts, and games. And the program would only take place in the mornings so that the afternoons and evenings are free to spend with each other as a family and with other Urantia families. My hope is that this format would create a welcoming atmosphere for parents who are not Urantia book readers. I think that in mixed families, there is mixed families where one parent is a reader and the other parent is not. There is a particular challenge for bringing Urantia teachings into the kids' lives. I'd like you to imagine for a moment, you're a parent who's really into the Urantia book, and your partner is not opposed to it, but not interested enough to want to go to a Urantia conference. So you have to choose how you're going to spend your vacation time and money. At a Urantia conference by yourself or at the beach with your family. Which would you choose? With Family Week, people don't need to make that choice. And I think there is great potential to engage people who have not shown an interest in attending a traditional Urantia conference, but people can still get together, spend time with other Urantia families, and I think that where Urantia families gather, topics of the Urantia book will come up. And the kids can be exposed to some basic Urantia teachings and make friends with other Urantia kids. Again, this is something that is still in development. I'm currently trying to get a sense of how much interest there is for something like this in the Urantia community. So anyone who's interested, visit my website, urantialifelessons.com, and fill out a little survey that I have there. So where are we at? I have told you about how SeraphiMail and CherubiMail bring Urantia lessons into people's homes on a regular basis. And I've told you about how Family Week creates space for relationships to form among Urantia families. Next, I'm going to tell you about the opportunities for service that I have been giving to my kids since they were very little. Can I make a triad out of that? Us Urantia book readers like triads. Truth, beauty, and goodness. There's a popular one. So for kids' religious education, how about lessons, community, and service? Draw whatever parallels you want, but I'm on a time limit, so I'm going to move on. I have found ways to include my kids in things that I do, and I'll just go down the list for you. I host a study group on and off, and we often include some time for worship when I do host. So at one point, I had them take the very colorful alphabet blocks that they were no longer using as much, and I had them paint them various shades of blue. And then I instructed them to quietly stack the blocks during a study group meditation as a visual that symbolized the building of the soul. That's one way that I incorporated them into our study group. I've also had them ring bells or hit play to start music on the computer to start and end worship. I've had them help with making my Urantia Life Lessons videos, and at first that was a test in patience as they would bicker about who would get to hit record or who would get to adjust the microphone stand. But now they have become quite useful. They tell me when my hair looks weird. They help set up shots. At one point, I was interviewing my dad for a series that we made, and the battery on one of the microphones died, and my kids noticed it immediately, and we were able to fix it, and they saved the day. And now the latest thing that I've included them on is that they were very helpful with the children and teen program that I ran in Baltimore. I had this grand vision of what the children's program would look like, but I was at a little bit of a loss about what to do with anyone over the age of 10. So I made them helpers. If one of the little kids needed some extra attention, I had an 11-year-old to be sent over to with them. When snacks needed to be found, I sent the 12 and 13-year-olds off to go find them. Who have we got here? My son is in a black t-shirt on this near the side, and I've got another son in this picture. I'll let you guys guess where he is. And they did other things too. They went on field trips and had some special time in the game room. But what I heard afterward was that what they really liked was being given responsibility. So, offering this triad of Urantia engagement, lessons, community, and service, I think is a good way to introduce Urantia teachings to kids. They'll learn what Urantia teachings are, they'll meet other people who care about them, and they'll see how those teachings get played out in real life. And all along the way, I have been looking to the past with inspiration from Urantia role models and non-Urantia role models. And I've been learning from them as we move our Urantia family resources into the future. If we are in need of any conversation prompts, I have some. So maybe just to get things started, you guys might have your own thoughts that are going through your head, but here are some prompts. How have you included kids in your Urantia activities? Does this bring to mind any ideas for how to include kids in study groups and worship? What are some best practices from other religions that you think could benefit children's religious education in the Urantia community? Do you have any anecdotes of things that went well when including kids in Urantia activities?
Thank you so much. That was incredible. What you guys are doing is remarkable. Well, Chris, what do you have to say about your child interviewing you?
Boy, I really thought, I mean, we have so many of those recordings. I thought I was, at first I was kind of shocked that it was the one about science, because it was the one where I was talking out of my butt the most and just hoping that what I said was accurate as to both science and what the Urantia book says.
Oh, you did
But
well.
I think that it's a good one to use, because even though I had no idea really what I was talking about, the point is I was trying to get the kids to think more about these things. And, they can later discover that I don't know what I'm doing, but it's important for them at that time to, to just keep their thoughts alive and not shut down their thoughts. And if their thoughts are about dimensions, well, let's try to talk about space and time and dimensions. Also, how delicious tide is.
I think that's one of the things that parents run into, is that they want, especially Urantia book parents, we want to say things accurately, but we don't always know how to say things accurately. And we don't want to say things that completely throw off our kids' understandings of the universe, but it is still important to find ways to be able to continue that conversation rather than just saying, and then you just don't say anything, or the conversation just ends.
You could see that Chris was stumped by the kids' questions a couple times. It took him a moment. Vicki, I also like the way that you incorporated traditional and revealed stories and bound them together. I thought that was a good approach, and then adding the interfaith. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been fun. It's been a fun project for me to do. Kind of evolved. And speaking of things that evolve, when I was thinking that when I was growing up, my family said that they were talking through their hat. That's evolved into.
Well, that's not bad. Alice, something that I thought was really, really unique, especially in this day and age, is that you snail mail things to kids, and they actually they can go and they have something in the mail to look at, as opposed to the email. I thought that was really, really a super cool approach. It's really, really
cool. And that was really important to me, just from my own experience as a parent. I get emailed a lot of things that are intended for my kids, and my kids never see them because I'm thinking about other things when I see that email. For a while, I didn't have a printer hooked up to my computer. So then if people don't have a printer, it's not going to make it to the kids. And yeah, I knew that I really wanted it to get in front of the kids and to just be around for a few days. And I thought that snail mail was the best way to do it. And kids love to receive mail. You
Yes.
know, it's exciting.
An interesting little experience is when Bill and I were doing a lot of traveling, our oldest grandchild was 4, and I tried to send him something several times a week because we were an integral part of his life. And one day his parents stopped and picked up the mail, and he asked if there was something for us, and they said yes, and they threw him all this advertisement, you know, all the junk mail, and he just had a tantrum. So it's interesting, even at 4 he knew the difference. So just a little, Chris, what have you got here?
I've got a question for Vicki. So both my kids have gone through your program. And I think you said, you know, focus for the 6 to 8 year olds for this part.
Mhm.
So you've had these kids go through, but then at some point, each kid kind of ages out of it. And so what's that process like for you? Are you just like, I can tell this kid just isn't following like they used to follow along, or they're
Yeah.
being more, you know, grumpy and sarcastic, and it's time for them to do something else with their Sundays? I mean, I know what it's like I know what it's like from, you know, parent side, but what's it like from you as the teacher side?
Well, what I would say to that is, with your 2 boys, we were meeting on Zoom. And I don't think Zoom is ideal for kids. And I think that had a lot to do with them starting to lose interest. They were, you know, they'd have to drop what they were doing on a Sunday morning and go on to Zoom with their grandma. And there weren't other kids, you know, I mean, they're much younger, trying to think, cousin, that's what I'm thinking of, much younger cousin. And there was a couple of girls their age too, but you know, Zoom is just not ideal at all for kids. And so I don't think it really didn't have a very, very good tryout with them, you know, because they weren't meeting in person with a small group of other kids. And when kids see other kids having to come to the same small group, like a Sunday school, let's say, you know, then they realize, oh, okay, other families have to do this too, and I guess I'll just go along with it. And then plus afterwards they get to play around together too. So I think that was the main thing that caused them to start to lose interest, was that it was on Zoom.
Yeah.
You know, our experience, I mean, now this was the pandemic, of course, but that it was a great thing to have happen, to be available, because Sunday schools had shut down. And so here was this thing they could go to. And maybe it was also just kind of that right age for them to be going to this specific thing.
Right.
So given what was available, we thought it was great.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, Steve, you had something?
Yes, I was just really delighted with both of your sharings and all the things you're doing. It brought up a lot of good ideas. I love the way you talked about how you were inspired by the seraphim and the angels of the churches. I love, Vicki, how you added some of the Bible verses and explaining it, you know, doing it for both for interfaith work. That's so important, I find, these days, and the way you said it for people who need it. So I really like that. And just the seraphim and CherubiMail, what a great idea to get family conversations going within the family. And I love the idea. I got excited about the family retreats because when I first moved to Virginia, I was hired to start multiple family therapy. And it was an alternative high school. And there's a way you can do it where they would, you know, teenagers don't like, it was teenagers, and they didn't like to go to family therapy because they were on the hot seat. But since there were other families there, it was 4 groups of 5 families each, and we would meet every other week. And they liked it because there were other teenagers there. And we'd started out the evolution of the group. I looked at I noted and observed and took notes on how the group evolved. And then I went into the research. And first of all, you started by breaking people into groups of teenagers, groups of mothers, and groups of fathers. And those groups didn't get a chance to, so you could do that as a model. And then they didn't want to talk to their family members, but they talked to others. So we would have large groups of cross-parenting going on. And then anytime we did training, we would put them into groups, and the families only solve problems together just in their little family. So that was very confidential, but it built community. It was great for this culture, US culture. They built community, and then they started meeting monthly. So, and I was thinking I would love to do that. There's some groups that do that, usually mostly in treatment programs, but for family vacations, like you said, it's a great way to do it. So it's just a lot of, I really appreciate the work you're doing. And I think, I want my godchildren and their children to know about it too. So. And one last thing is that you asked what have I found helpful? Like, I like this little book, What is God? I don't know if you can see it, but you may know that one. It just talks about different faiths. And just, I guess the reason why I wanted to come to yours is when I've taught Sunday school, that's just brought me so much joy to teach, spiritual things. And so I did it for Unity for a while, and you had to be creative. I had like 3-year-olds, 7-year-olds, and 12 years all in one group. And so Unity has these qualities for each of the month, like there's strength for January and kindness for February. My kids were really interested in animals, so we had to figure out how could we bring animals. So we wrote a rap, kind of about the different strengths and animals, like kind of like, I've got the strength of 100,000 doggies. I've got the kindness of a kitty cat. And then they would present it to the church. And, they would come down, they would stay at the beginning of the church, and we'd go off in our group, and they'd come back and they'd teach the rest of the adults. And that reminded me of what you said, Vicki. You were given an opportunity to do that twice. That was amazing that you started so early talking about the teachings of Jesus. And anyway, every single time we did it, it was exactly what the adults had been talking about before we got there. So anyway, I just wanted to share that, and thank you for your work, and just keep on keeping on.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie. Ruthie.
Oh, me actually, yeah.
Sorry, Brad.
Oh, you guys are, you're confusing us now.
Oh yeah. So Ruthie and I were not parents yet, but God willing, we're prospective parents. And one of the thoughts, so for 15 years, I spent a lot of time around very secular people. I was a scientist in a federal science agency, so I was around a lot of people who didn't raise their kids in religious ways. And the going thought there, when it seemed people talked about it, was that Bible stories are boring and they're old and they're musty and they just can't hold a candle to Mario and Spider-Man. And I don't know, Alice, Chris, you both have boys. I mean, how do you find the engagement of these religious stories compared to all the bright, shiny, spinny, blingy things that are out there in more secular culture?
I think that probably the topics that come up around our house regarding the Urantia book tend to be some of these other topics that are found in parts 1, 2, and 3 of the Urantia book. I think that talking about part 4 was more something that they did with my mom, like during the Sunday lessons that they did with the coloring pages. So I don't know, maybe there was some of that sense that you were just describing, that I think these other topics in the Urantia book tend to be ones that interest my mind more, and that maybe was also passed down to the boys. But then I also remember just growing up with the Urantia book and being really entertained by some of the stories, like the one about, who was it? John Mark running naked through the, or like there are ways to kind of flash it up. I remember talking about what celebrities would play which characters in the Urantia book, and that's just kind of one way to engage with kids and help them develop a better understanding of who these characters are in part 4 of the Urantia book.
Alice, thank you. I've got a question for you that's come in. Presuming your children are not being homeschooled and noting the sophisticated questions they posed your dad, Chris, in your recording a number of years back, how are they dealing with regular school, the science curriculum, and their friends and teachers relative the science and other as presented by the Urantia versus a traditional curriculum for school now?
I don't think they have any problems with it in that recording. He probably hears things like that from a podcast that's geared toward kids called Wow in the World. And so for him, science has always been his strong suit, but I don't think it's ever been something that made him feel like he was too advanced for whatever they were talking about in school. He's always just kind of melded in just fine into the school curriculum.
Okay, great. Thank you. Chuck, you're kind of lurking back there.
Yeah, I am. Well, one of the things I really appreciated or enjoyed hearing about was your use of Jesus stories, short Jesus stories. And it sounds like you found a lot of them. How many did you say?
Yeah, 155.
155. Yeah, that's impressive.
Right. And there could have been more,
Oh, God, yeah.
But
they all fit like in a paragraph. They're all fairly short.
Yeah, I stick to the same format, just a short story summary, always 6 lines. And then the discussion question part is always 3 lines, I'm standardizing things.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, great for the sense of familiarity for the kids, I'm sure.
Yeah, right.
So I'm just curious finding them must be quite a process, but how you arrange them and how you order them. Because what strikes me, the potential in that approach that's so exciting, I think, is that the kids have the possibility of actually getting to know Jesus through these stories, it sounds like. I mean, these are from the Urantia Book, right? They're all from the Urantia Book?
They're all from the Urantia. They're in the Urantia Book and the Bible.
Oh, so
they're the traditional classic.
You look for ones that are in both places.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Cool.
But then the kids can read then in the Urantia Book, or the teacher can read to them, perhaps, what it said, what the story is in the Urantia Book. And, for me, as putting these things together, it was really interesting to me, because sometimes the Bible story, takes up about this much text, very short. And then the Urantia Book extends it, puts it in bigger context, adds
a little more detail,
a little bit of correction, that's needed. And and then sometimes I found some pretty surprising things I was not expecting that was in the Urantia Book story.
Yeah.
And so it was fun for me. It was, when I put it together, the curriculum list, you can see it at that website I was talking about, how a complete listing of the stories and how I arrange them throughout the school year.
Yeah, that's what I'm curious about. If there's a method to your arrangement of the stories.
Yeah, definitely.
Not just chronological.
It goes chronologically, but there's five, it's a 5-year curriculum, and there's 5 stories. The first grouping of stories is always gathering the disciples. And the last grouping of stories is one of the appearances. And so it kind of goes through Jesus' life, a ministry life, all the way to his death. But then all the stories are also consecutive. If you read through year 1, all the way through it, it's consecutive. It's a little hard for me to explain, but it's very apparent if you see it on the online, the list.
Well, it sounds like there's continuity for the kids.
Yeah. Although the kids can join the cycle of stories at any time, because each lesson does stand on its own.
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
Well, the thing about that really intrigues me is the idea of the kids kind of getting to know Jesus, so he's not just this mythical Bible figure or something that, the Urantia Book talks about Jesus and tells these stories. They're very down to earth. They're almost cinematic sometimes. You could, like you're saying, you could almost want to do some casting. Who would you cast for this story?
Yeah, right. Right.
To bring out the personal qualities that are, kind of revealed.
Yeah. I was able to find the stories just from my own experience of teaching Sunday school. I was familiar with it, and looking at children's Bible story books, I knew that's how I was able to take up. But also, Preston Thomas has this book, Life and Teachings of Jesus, and that was helpful too in identifying the stories that are common to both.
Yeah. Well, I was intrigued to see the What is God book. because right now I'm visiting with Angie, my daughter, and her son, who's 3, and her husband, of course. And they have that book. And I found myself wanting to change it to who is God instead of what is God. And in some cases, I just made that little edit. I don't know. I don't know if it makes any difference to him at 3 years old. But the thing about the Jesus stories is Jesus is very much a who. It's not a what. Not an it. It's a who. It's a person, right? And Jesus, of course, makes God knowable personally. And that's what's kind of so exciting about, his bestowal and everything that went with it. So anyway.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you.
But that shows kind of something in the culture that they would frame it as what is God rather than who is God. So,
Stephanie?
If someone wanted to get Cherubim and SeraphiMail, how would they do that?
That's a great question. They go to urantialifelessons.com.
Okay. Thank you. And then I know for me, working with children and doing and actually preparing the lessons, it brought so much joy, and I got inspiration. And you're doing so much wonderful work. What brings you joy? And what's next? I mean, what are you inspired to do next? What brings you joy in this work? The most important thing, of all the things you're doing.
Thing that brings me joy. I really like seeing the finished product. Well, kind of 2 things. One is the hope at the beginning and the finished product at the end. I remember going to fabric stores back when I thought that I was going to be a costume designer, and I'd want to buy all this fabric, and sometimes I would buy fabric to make things, and then I never made them. But I get that same sense of just the joy and the possibilities. So I'm always dreaming up new ideas. And the thing that I've been more successful with Urantia work rather than costume design is that I'm actually carry through on some of the ideas rather than the piles of fabric that I still have from 20 years ago. And so being able to see that physical product, especially if it's something that I can see sort of in person, like when we did the children's program in Baltimore, that was just a lot of fun to be away from my computer and actually interacting with people. I loved that. But then every time there's a new SeraphiMail made, I just love to look at it and know what it's going to do for people.
Sounds really fulfilling.
Yeah. Ruthie Brad.
Ruthie Brad, yes.
Ruthie Brad.
Ruthie this time. Well, I just wanted to comment and then maybe ask for more examples if they exist. I really appreciated, Alice, when you were talking about service with your kids. You had a service project and you just brought them along. And I just think that's a beautiful, simple thing to remember. And that's certainly been my experience as a teacher in so many ways, that it's how I'm showing up, and, I am the model, and then we just sort of bring other people, little people along. So I'm curious, pretty much anyone here who has children or who maybe has observed parents involving children in service projects, just if there are any other ideas or any other instances because, for example, not all of us are recording our own videos to put on YouTube. So what for the rest of us, could be ways to incorporate kids in our service?
I always ask their opinion, get their help on that. I think asking, just asking them what they would be inspired to do. What can we do to help others? Or whatever you're doing, you can help other kids along their way, stopping and helping people along their way. I don't know.
Well, how can we help God too? That's an interesting thing to talk about.
Yep.
What's God doing that we can help with? So especially if you're getting to know Jesus and you get a perspective on his life ministry, that's pretty inspiring dedication. So it can certainly be talked about. I don't know.
I just saw Joanne put in the chat that she used to take her boys to a food pantry, They loved packing up the food into bags to hand out. They also enjoyed eating the day-old donuts. Yeah, so there's Urantia specific work, which can be a little tricky to include kids on, just because so much of it requires computer skills, at least for the kinds of stuff that I do. There was the study group that they helped with meditations. But then a lot of stuff, like I just kind of have to wait until they develop the computer skills. One thing I've been having them do is they will help design the SeraphiMail pages. They do a lot of the formatting for me. They help find an image. They help create an activity, because now they have those computer skills. But they wouldn't have been able to do that when they were 5. But then, if people aren't able to find Urantia specific work for their kids to do, there's all these other ways that they can be helpful, like packing up food for a food pantry. And those kinds of opportunities abound.
I think just observing it, I think something that Alice does particularly well is just bringing the kids into her projects. I mean, running the camera and running the lights and running the sound. And if you see the uncut videos, you hear them yelling, "Cut! I can see the microphone in the background," and stuff. And all of that. So, incorporating them like that for the Baltimore conference, I don't know how much they helped design, but they certainly were very, had a lot of input into the program that Alice developed. So I think that Alice does that much better than I do. I'm much more of a, I ask the kids, "Hey, do you want to go to this Zoom meeting with me where we're talking about administrative stuff?" And they say, "No, thank you." So Alice is much better at it than I am.
And it's not always easy. Like there's, you probably see Instagram photos of moms who are joyfully baking cookies with their kids. And anyone who has baked cookies with kids knows that there is often, there's things that come up. Stuff gets measured incorrectly while you have your back turned, and kids start throwing flour at each other. And it's the same way with any of this work. Like I mentioned before, there's a certain amount of, sometimes they bicker about things. Sometimes they just get things wrong. So it really has to be sort of like a service in and of itself. I'm serving my kids, and I'm serving the rest of society by having my kids grow up into people who are helpful in this way.
Interesting. An observer here commented that she would bring her daughter when she donated blood, and telling her that would help, that it helped a lot of people to do that.
Actually said it would save 4 lives. And her daughter called her from college and said, "Mom, I just saved 4 lives."
Oh,
I do that with my kids. I take them to go. I mean, part of it is so that I have to act brave when they, have a needle near my arm, because I can't be nervous in front of the kids. But, same thing, yeah.
I was doing a PowerPoint for a workshop of some sort, and I was just feeling and learning my way through. And this has been several years ago, but my granddaughter was 6 years old, and she was sitting on my lap, and I'm trying to create this PowerPoint, and she was correcting me saying, "Grams, no, do this, Grams." And at first I dismissed her, and then I realized she knew way more than I did, and she was 6. So you can be confident in the kids helping with the computer skills.
Yeah, Vicki, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say sometimes kids, the 2 grandsons helped me in ways they don't even realize they helped me. When I was when we did those Zoom lessons, I learned a lot about conducting a little class when I was doing this on Zoom with them, and they just don't even realize they helped me so much, and I'm always amazed at how much they knew. They really did, and they understood, and they knew a lot. And it's maybe they just absorbed it somehow, but I also remember being with them, and when they were quite young, one of them had a Bible story book that he liked quite a bit, and he wanted me to read it with him. And on one side of the page, there was a question that was being asked of the children reading the book. And it was kind of, and he always would put his hand over that question and say, don't read that. And and that really made me stop and think, he didn't like that question for some reason, that style of question. And I realized that it was kind of an invasive question, very personal, and he just didn't want somebody asking him that question. And that made me realize to go, when I would make my discussion questions, that, stay away from those invasive questions that are too personal.
Mhm.
That's all I have to say.
Well, thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments?
Um, just
Go ahead,
one more-
Chuck, go.
Yeah, one more quick one, maybe. So it sounds like you're introducing seraphim and cherubim to the kids. Am I correct in that?
Mhm.
Yeah. So how do they understand? Do they have an understanding of invisible beings, or how do you explain that? Or even the master seraphim, but particularly just the seraphim and the cherubim. They're part of the sort of the conceptual package that you're presenting. So I'm just curious if that's just sort of taken for granted, or if you try to explain that in some way. Because in the culture, I know there are a lot of people who just dismiss the idea of angels. It's sort of, oh, that's just, mythology or something. So we have the opportunity to reintroduce the reality of these beings that are unseen. And I'm just curious how you handle that.
I can't think of how we have addressed angels before. I know how we've addressed thought adjusters. I often describe them as helping us to set priorities in our minds, and not controlling our thoughts, but helping us to sort of organize our thoughts.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if they would just kind of put angels sort of into that same category as, acting in subtle fashions.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. Chris, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I will say that with almost all of this, especially with the kids, and this is just me and how I grew up, I take all of my leads from the kids. I don't try to initiate these conversations. I let them ask questions.
Uh-huh.
But being able to work just the concepts into everyday life, like calling them seraphim and cherubim,
Yeah.
helps bring the questions forward.
That's good.
So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
A little thing I used to do with the kids is Enya, which is beautiful music. I would dance them just before nap time and say, that sounds like angels singing. And it kind of began to stimulate that imagination that there's more than what we can see.
Yeah, that's a really
Music,
good thing.
music is, we feel it, but we can't see it.
I'd like to really thank all the panelists for joining us here. And I would like to thank Vicki and Alice for putting this together.